The numbers are staggering, yet they become background noise. We hear them every day on the news, flickering across the bottom of the screen in a constant crawl of existential dread. The United States is hurtling toward $40 trillion in debt. Japan's obligations are so massive they represent more than 250% of its entire economic output. Even the powerhouses, Germany, China, the oil kingdoms of the Middle East, are tethered to balance sheets that bleed red ink. It feels like a global bankruptcy waiting to happen, a house of cards held together by nothing but habit. But if every nation on earth is a debtor, we have to ask the one question that the financial system is not designed to answer. Who is the landlord? If everyone is borrowing, who is doing the lending? Welcome to Wealth Records, where we pull back the curtain on the machinery of money, power, and the hidden forces that shape our lives. Today, we aren't just looking at numbers, we are looking at the architecture of a planet owned by its own future. To understand the modern world, you have to realize that debt is not a bug in the system. It is the system. It is the invisible scaffolding upon which every skyscraper is built, every war is fought, and every social program is funded. If you were to wave a magic wand and erase all debt tomorrow, the global economy wouldn't just slow down, it would cease to exist. There would be no currency, no credit, no commerce. We have reached a point where the world owes over $315 trillion, nearly 3 times the value of all the goods and services produced by every human being on the planet in a single year. We are living on a borrowed planet, and to see how we got here, we have to travel back to a time when debt was a matter of life and death. In the late 17th century, the concept of a nation was changing. In 1694, England was locked in a grueling war with France. King William III needed ships, gunpowder, and men, but the royal coffers were empty. In the old world, a king would simply seize property or raise taxes until the peasants revolted. But William tried something different. He turned to a group of wealthy merchants and offered them a deal: lend the crown £1.2 million. And in return, the government would pay them a permanent stream of interest backed by the future tax revenues of the kingdom. To manage this loan, the Bank of England was born. This was the Big Bang of modern finance. It transformed debt from a shameful burden into a powerful tool of statecraft. For the first time, a country could spend money it hadn't yet earned. Lenders didn't just get their money back. They received a bond, a piece of paper representing the government's promise to pay. These bonds could be traded, sold, and used as collateral. They became a form of private wealth built on public obligation. The ability to borrow became the ability to rule. If you could convince people your debt was safe, you could outspend your enemies and conquer the world. The British Empire wasn't built just on naval power. It was built on the credibility of its debt. As the centuries passed, every major power adopted this model. The United States used it to fund the Revolution. Alexander Hamilton famously called a national debt a national blessing, if it wasn't excessive, because it tied the interests of the wealthy to the survival of the government. By the 20th century, the gold standard, the idea that money had to be backed by something physical, was discarded. In its place, we installed the debt standard. Today, money is no longer a claim on gold, it is a claim on a promise. Every dollar in your pocket, every digit in your bank account, is essentially a receipt for debt held somewhere else. This brings us to the great paradox of the 21st century. We are told the U.S. owes $38 trillion, but who holds the other end of that rope? The common myth is that a foreign power, usually China, owns the United States. But when you look at the ledger, the reality is far more surreal. Out of the trillions owed by America, the vast majority is owed to Americans. It's held by your pension fund, your 401k, your local bank, and the Federal Reserve itself. Think about the circularity of that for a moment. The government issues a bond to raise money. Your pension fund buys that bond because it's considered the safest investment on earth. The government uses that money to build a road or fund a military. To pay the interest on that bond, the government collects taxes from you. That tax money then travels through the Treasury and back into your pension fund as an interest payment. It is a giant planetary mirror. We are the creditors and the debtors simultaneously. We are paying ourselves interest with our own tax money, minus the massive fees taken by the institutions in the middle. But this isn't just an American phenomenon, it's a global web of mutual obligation. Japan lends to the U.S. by buying treasuries. The U.S. provides the capital for the IMF. The IMF lends to emerging markets in Africa or South America. Those nations, in turn, take their earnings and park them back in Western banks or European bonds for safety. It is a game of financial musical chairs where the music never stops because everyone is holding someone else's chair. However, just because the debt is circular doesn't mean it's harmless. While the world might owe the money to itself, the people who own the assets and the people who owe the labor are not the same. This is the hidden engine of inequality. In this system, debt acts as a massive vacuum, sucking wealth upward. When a government takes on debt, the interest is paid by the taxpayer, the working and middle classes. But the interest is received by the bondholders. the banks, the hedge funds, and the ultra-wealthy who have the capital to lend in the first place. Global debt and global inequality are two sides of the same coin. The more a nation borrows, the more it transfers the future productivity of its citizens to the current owners of capital. This is why, in the halls of power, there is no real plan to ever pay the debt off. You might hear politicians campaign on balancing the budget, but it's largely theater. If the United States actually paid off its $38 trillion debt, it would trigger a global catastrophe. Because government bonds are the foundational asset of the world, if they vanished, banks would have no collateral, the money supply would collapse, and the world would enter a deflationary death spiral. The system requires the debt to grow. It requires the rolling over of loans, issuing new debt to pay off the old. In the corporate world, this would be a Ponzi scheme. In the world of sovereign nations, it's called monetary policy. The true masters of this domain aren't the presidents or prime ministers. They are the bond vigilantes and the central bankers. Institutions like the Federal Reserve or the European Central Bank have the power to create money out of thin air to buy government debt. This keeps interest rates low and the machine humming. But it also means that the value of your labor is constantly being diluted. Every time a central bank prints money to support the debt, the purchasing power of your savings drops. You aren't being taxed through a bill in the mail. You're being taxed through the rising cost of eggs, rent, and fuel. We see what happens when this trust breaks. When a country like Greece or Sri Lanka can no longer convince the world that it can roll over its debt, the invisible creditors suddenly take on terrifying faces. The IMF arrives with austerity measures. They demand that the nation cut health care, slash pensions, and sell off its infrastructure to pay back the bondholders. In those moments, the illusion of we owe it to ourselves vanishes, and the cold reality of you owe it to us takes over. So, who owns the nations? It isn't a single person or a single country. It is a self-perpetuating loop of institutional credit. We are living in a world where the future has been pre-sold to the present. Every child born today in a developed nation arrives with a 5-figure bill already attached to their name, a debt they didn't ask for, to pay for things consumed before they were born. The dividing of the earth isn't happening through borders or armies anymore. It's happening through the ledger. Nations are being divided into those who own the debt and those who are owned by it. We are told that the system is stable as long as there is confidence. But confidence is a fragile thing. It is based on the belief that tomorrow will always be more productive than today, that we can keep borrowing from a future that has no limit. But the future is not infinite. Resources are finite. Human labor has limits. We are currently testing the boundaries of how much imaginary wealth we can pile on top of a very real world. The numbers on the screen can grow forever, but the world they represent cannot. As we look at the $315 trillion global bill, we have to realize that the goal was never repayment. The goal was control. The debt is the leash that keeps nations aligned with the global financial order. It is the weight that keeps the status quo in place. But history tells us that every debt cycle eventually reaches a breaking point, a moment where the promises become too heavy for the reality to carry. Whether that ends in a great reset, a hyperinflationary fire, or a new way of thinking about value is the great question of our age. At Wealth Records, we believe that understanding the ledger is the first step to freedom. You cannot navigate a system if you don't know who holds the map. The global creditors may own the nations, but they only own the future, as long as we continue to believe in the ink they've printed. If this deep dive into the architecture of our world opened your eyes, make sure to subscribe and join our community. We are dissecting the past to protect your future. The truth is hidden in the records. I'll show you where to look.